Hi everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm Mike Fisher, and in this video, we'll be looking at the cloud sustainability topic and understanding sustainability aspects further as we dive into 3 different groupings or scopes of greenhouse gas emissions and how those relate to cloud computing. All this is going to be the foundational prerequisite info as we dive into the AWS Sustainability Pillar of the well-architected framework. Now, there's going to be a lot of stuff to cover here, so this is going to be a multi-part video series, but by the end, you'll have a solid understanding of cloud sustainability and all the different aspects of the sustainability pillar of the AWS well-architected framework. Now, this video is a continuation of an earlier video I made looking at some of the parallels between sustainability and cloud cost optimization. That video should be popping up on the screen here, or if not, you can check out the link in the description below. Now, I'd suggest checking out that video first if you haven't already, as it goes over some of the core themes and concepts we'll be diving into deeper here as part of this video and the next videos in this series. So first, let's tackle the topic of sustainability first, coming at it from a perspective of a business entity. Sustainability is all about looking at the long-term consequences of what your business does. And this involves finding ways to minimize the negative impacts, such as pollution and resource depletion, while promoting positive outcomes. By prioritizing sustainability, businesses can ensure they're not only successful in the present, but also contributing to a healthier and more prosperous future for everyone. At the end of the day, it's not just about making that short-term profit right now, but making sure your business is making the world a better place for everyone in the long run. Now, going back to that earlier video I just mentioned, the great thing about cloud sustainability is that many of the efficiencies that contribute to positive environmental impacts also have significant cost-saving components to them as well, making sustainability a win-win for many businesses operating in the cloud today. You get to help the planet and help your profits at the same time. So for your organization's cloud-based workloads, the concept of sustainability is about recognizing the consequences of the cloud services you use and assessing the effects throughout their entire lifecycle of the workload and implementing design guidelines and proven methods to minimize these consequences. Now, whether you're a CTO, a cloud architect, a cloud engineer, a developer, or any type of similar role, this video and the upcoming parts will help you understand the environmental impacts of your cloud and application designs. It'll get you thinking about all the energy consumption and overall efficiency of your cloud workloads, as this all directly contributes towards lowering resource utilization costs and your business's carbon footprint. So how does a business measure and manage its carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions? Well, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is one of the most widely used greenhouse gas accounting standards. This Greenhouse Gas Protocol helps businesses understand and manage their greenhouse gas emissions by organizing them into 3 main groups or scopes. The AWS Sustainability Pillar also references this Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the scope groupings, so it's going to be important for us to have a high-level understanding of all that before moving on. Now, let us take a look at these different scopes or groups using some cars as an example to help us understand these different scope areas. So we have 3 groups of cars here that are all different colors, each color group representing a scope or category of greenhouse gas emissions. So let's talk about each group or scope of cars here. First, we have the red cars, and we'll call this our Scope 1 group. These are the cars that create their own emissions. These would be like our typical internal combustion engine cars you see on the streets with harmful combustion gases coming out of the tailpipe. These cars directly make the greenhouse gas emissions. Now, for a real-life business, this Scope 1 group includes all the sources of greenhouse gases that that business directly creates, like when they burn fuel for heat or operate machines in their factories. Now, the second group of cars in our Scope 2 group, these are blue cars. And these cars don't create their own emissions directly, but they get their energy from somewhere else. You could think of these blue cars as our electric vehicles. So they don't directly make emissions and create them out of a tailpipe like our Scope 1 red cars, but they need electricity to charge the batteries. But the electricity being used to charge the batteries comes from somewhere. And we could think of a coal-burning power plant as an example. So our blue cars here are indirectly creating greenhouse gases by using the electricity generated from a power plant used to produce it. So Scope 2 is all about the greenhouse gases that come from electricity, heat, or other sources that a business buys from someone else. Now, this third group here, Scope 3, these will be our green cars. Now, similar to the blue Scope 2 cars, they don't create greenhouse gas emissions directly. They're electric vehicles still, And now we know about the indirect emissions from the Scope 2 area from the electrical power generation, But with this Scope 3 grouping here, this is allowing us to account for other emissions involved with the car's life cycle. So if we think of this end-to-end life cycle of the vehicle, there's a lot more emission sources to account for. Now, as some example areas to think about here, if you consider all the offices of the car manufacturer being used for all the employees to design the car, and the different supply chain factories involved to mine and produce all the raw materials for the car, and then the assembly factory and the transport trucks and cargo ships that deliver the vehicles to the different dealership destinations. And then there's also the dealership itself and all the maintenance involved with it and replacement parts. These individual areas in the supply chain often have their own Scope 1, 2, and 3 emission categories, like the direct emissions from the factories to mine, ship, smelt, and produce the raw materials, and the power for the assembly factories, even all the garbage and recycling produced from the employees working at these facilities. Now, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole here, but you should have a sense of this Scope 3 accounting level being related to the complex indirect supply chain involved with all the other ways a business operates and how they're connected to greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this scope example stuff here is in no way electric versus internal combustion engine vehicle comparison, but it was just to highlight some of the ways to think about the different aspects involved in each of these greenhouse gas protocol scope categories. So to quickly review, we have Scope 1 being the direct emissions from activities controlled by the business. Scope 2, the emissions from indirect sources like electricity, cooling, and heating. And Scope 3, the indirect emissions that aren't controlled by the company through their vendor supply chain and other business operations like flights for business travel and so forth. So jumping back to the cloud computing stuff here, as a cloud provider customer, using what we just learned, where do your business workloads running in the cloud fit in? Is it Scope 1, Scope 2, or Scope 3? Now, before you go ahead and answer that, please take a moment to like and share the video if you found it helpful so far. And also don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated on the next videos on this cloud sustainability topic, as well as keep up to date on a lot of other great videos we have planned for the channel. So going back to our question here, what was your guess? Scope 1, 2, or 3? Well, we can certainly rule out Scope 1 for sure, as we don't have any direct emissions to our business being caused simply by using resources in a public cloud. Now, Scope 2 is more the indirect emissions around purchasing power for the business, which we're not really doing in this case. So that leaves us more with Scope 3. By using a public cloud provider, we don't have any direct control over the operations of that cloud provider organization. Our usage of resources in the cloud fall into that indirect vendor supply chain the business uses. So if using cloud resources results in Scope 3 emissions for a company using a cloud provider, what can we do as consumers to lower the overall greenhouse gas emissions and the company's carbon footprint? Well, this gets into what sustainability aspects the cloud provider we use is responsible for and what we as customers are responsible for. So in the next video, we'll be looking at the AWS shared responsibility model to get more clarity on this. Now, most of you may already be familiar with the AWS shared responsibility model, but we'll be looking at it from a different angle than you may be used to. We'll be checking out the shared responsibility model through a sustainability lens and understanding what sits on our shoulders as customers to help lower carbon impacts and what areas the cloud provider is responsible for. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.